is also repeated in Surah Yunus, chapter number 10, verse number 5, as well as Surah Nuh, chapter number 71, verse number 15, that the light of the moon is borrowed or reflected. I'll ask the atheist, who could have mentioned this in the Quran 1400 years ago, that the light of the moon is not its own light, but it is a reflected or borrowed light? The atheist may say, maybe your prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was very intelligent, he was very well versed in science. Don't argue with him. Continue. When I was in school, I passed my school in 1982. I had learnt in school that the sun, along with the solar system, it did revolve, but the sun did not rotate about its own axis. The atheist says, is that what is mentioned in the Quran? I say, no, this is what I learned in school. This is what I learned in school about 34 years back. I learned in school 34 years back that the sun did not rotate about its axis. But the Quran says in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 33, it says, Huwa allazi khalaqa al-layla wan-nahara. It is Allah who has created the night and the day. Wa-shamsa wal-qamar, the sun and the moon. Kullun fi falaki yasbahun, each one traveling in orbit with its own motion. The Arabic word yasbahun describes the motion of a moving body. If I use this word, the yasbahun is derived from the Arabic word sabaha, which describes the motion of a moving body. And if I use this word for a person on the floor, it will not mean he's rolling, it will mean he's walking or running. If I use it for a person in the water, it will not mean he's floating, it will mean he's swimming. Similarly, when it's mentioned in the Quran for a celestial body, it does not mean it is flying, it means it is rotating about its own axis. Imagine I read in school about 34 years back that the sun was stationary, it did not rotate about its own axis, and the Quran says 1400 years ago that the sun rotates. But now, after science is advanced, they have come to know that the sun does rotate. You can have the image of the sun on a tabletop, and we find there are black spots. And these black spots take about 25 days to complete one rotation, indicating that the sun takes about 25 days to complete one rotation. Imagine what I read in school. Today, after science advance, we have come to know it is wrong. That means hardly 30, 40, 50 years back, we came to know that the sun also rotates about its own axis. And Quran mentioned this 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran? Now the atheist, he will pause. He will not reply. Don't wait for the answer. Ask him the next question. You ask him the next question. That today the scientists, they tell us the sunlight that we have is due to a chemical reaction that is taking place since billions of years. And one day, this chemical reaction will cease to exist, and life on the face of this earth will also cease to exist. Quran says in Surah Yasin, chapter number 36, verse number 34, it says, وَالشَّمْسَ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا. Surah Yasin, chapter 36, verse number 38, وَالشَّمْسَ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا. The sun is running its course for a period determined. Mustaqar, besides meaning a period determined, also means a place determined. That means the Quran says the sun will only function for a period determined. The other meaning, a place determined, today's science tells us that the sun, along with the solar system, is moving to a point in the universe, in the Herculeans, which is known as Alpha Lyra, as the solar apex, at a speed of 12 miles per second. What science came to know today, that the sun is moving to a point determined and will be there for a period determined, is mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran? And the atheist will be silent. Don't wait for the answer. Ask him the next question. That today science tells us the atmosphere that we have outside the earth, it acts like a ceiling. It prevents the harmful radiation, the X-rays and the ultraviolet rays from entering the earth, the surface of the earth. If this was not there, then life would not exist on the face of the earth. Quran says in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 32, that we have made the sky as a protected ceiling. What science discovered recently, 50 years back, 100 years back, 200 years back, 300 years back, the Quran mentions 1400 years ago that the sky has been made a protected ceiling. When I was in school, I had learned that there are 3 states of matter: solid, liquid and gas. And the scientists that time, they thought that outside the organized astronomical system, there was vacuum. Today the scientists say that outside the organized astronomical system are bridges of matter which they call as plasma. And this, they say, is the 4th state of matter. Quran says in Surah Shura, chapter number 42, verse number 11, it is Almighty God who has created the heaven and the earth and everything in between. Also says in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 59, that Allah has created the heaven and the earth and everything in between. That means there are things in between the organized astronomical system, which today the scientists call as plasma, the 4th state of matter. According to Edwin Hubble, who was a very famous scientist, he discovered in the last century that our universe is expanding, and it was one of the greatest discoveries of the last century. Our universe is receding from one another, and Quran mentioned this 1400 years ago. It's mentioned in Surah Dhariyat, chapter number 51, verse number 47, that we have created the vastness of space, the expanding universe. The Arabic word is mu'siyuna, vastness. Imagine what the scientists came to know recently, hardly 100 years back. The Quran mentions 1400 years ago that the universe is expanding. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran? And the atheists would be silent. There may be certain skeptics who will say it's nothing great that the Quran speaks about astronomy, since the Arabs were advanced in the field of astronomy. I do agree with them that the Arabs were advanced in the field of astronomy, but I would like to remind them, it was centuries after the Quran was revealed that the Arabs became advanced in the field of astronomy. So it's from the Quran that the Arabs learned about astronomy and not the vice versa. In the field of physics, about 23 centuries ago, there was a very famous theory known as theory of atomism. It was propounded by the Greeks, by the Democrats, and they believed that atom is the smallest part of matter which cannot be divided. And this was also known to the Arabs. This was also known to the Arabs, and in Arabic it was called a zarra. Zarra meaning an atom, the smallest part according to scientists. But today science is advanced, and we have come to know that the atom, though is the smallest part of matter, having the characteristic of an element, it too can be divided into neutrons, into protons. And the Quran speaks about zarra. So many people may think if the Quran speaks about zarra as the smallest part, and today science tells us that the atom can be divided, that means the Quran is outdated. If you read the Quran says in Surah Sabah, chapter number 34, verse number 3, that when they tell you that the hour will never come, the hour of judgment, tell them it will surely come with the permission of thy Lord, in whose record is mentioned the smallest detail of an atom, talking about the zarra, and even things smaller and greater than the atom. That means Quran already mentions that there are things smaller and greater than the atom. And this message is repeated in Surah Yunus, chapter number 10, verse number 61, that when they ask thee regarding the hour, tell them the hour will surely come with the permission of thy Lord, in whose record is very clear, is perspicacious, things as small as the atom and things greater and smaller than the atom. So the Quran is not outdated, it is up to date. It tells in advance that there are things smaller and greater than the atom. Who could have mentioned this in the Quran? In the field of hydrology, in school we learn about the water cycle. And the water cycle we learn in the school was first propounded by Sir Bernard Palissy in 1580. And we learn in school that the water evaporates from the ocean, it rises, forms into clouds, the clouds move in the interior, they fall down as rain, and the water table is replenished. We learn this in school. Previously, in 2nd century BC, Thales of Miletus, he said it was the spray of the ocean which was picked up by the wind, which fell into the interior like rain. Previously, people thought it was the pressure of the wind on the ocean which thrust the water into the interior. We did not know how did the underground water come. So first people thought it was the pressure of the wind which forced the water into the interior, and it went back by a secret passage known as Tartarus at the time of Plato. Even till as late as 17th century, Descartes believed in this. Even in 19th century, Aristotle, he propounded the theory that the underground water was due to the mountain caverns, they feeding the underground water. Today we know that the underground water is due to the seepage of the rainwater in the cracks in the ground. It's mentioned in the Quran. In Surah Zumar, chapter number 39, verse number 21, seest not thou, it is he who sends down water from the sky and leads it in cracks in grounds and causes sown field of varying colors to grow. Quran is talking about the underground water 14 years ago, which we came to know recently. Quran speaks about the water cycle in great detail. The Quran says in Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse number 24, it is he who sends down water from the sky and gives life to the earth after it is dead. It's mentioned in Surah Mu'minun, chapter number 23, verse number 18. It is he who sends down water from the sky and is able to store it or even drain it. It's mentioned in Surah Hijr, chapter number 15, verse number 22. It says that it is he who sends fecundating winds, winds impregnating. The Arabic word lawaki, coming from the word lakaha, means to impregnate. And today we know that science tells us that the pollens picked up by the wind impregnate the cloud and waterfalls. And one more reason is that when the clouds join together and later on the water falls from the sky. It's further mentioned in Surah Nur, chapter number 24, verse number 43, that the clouds rise, they join together, and then water emerges from the top, from the sky. It's mentioned in Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse number 48, that the water rises from the sky, forms into clouds, the cloud moves the interior, they join together, they make a heap, and the water emerges from the sky. The Quran speaks about the water cycle in great detail in several verses. In Surah Araf, chapter number 7, verse number 57. In Surah Rad, chapter number 13, verse number 17. In Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 48 and 49. In Surah Fatir, chapter number 35, verse number 9. In Surah Ghashiyah, chapter number 45, verse number 5. In Surah Qaf, chapter number 50, verse number 9 and 10. It's mentioned in Surah Waqia, chapter 56, verse number 67 to 70. It's mentioned in Surah Mulk, chapter number 67, verse number 30. It's mentioned in Surah Tariq, chapter number 86, verse number 11. There are verses I can keep on quoting only in the Quran which talk about water cycle. Who could have mentioned so much detail about the water cycle, which we came to know in the 16th century, some of it, and some of it recently? Don't wait for the answer, you can continue. Today in the field of geology, the geologists tell us that the earth on which we live, it's approximately little less than 4,000 miles in radius. And the deeper layer, they are hot and fluid and cannot sustain life. But the layers on top, it gets solid, and the superficial layer is a thin crust, hardly 1 to 10 miles in thickness. It's less than 1% in thickness. And there are high possibility that this superficial crust of the earth, it will shake. It is due to the folding phenomena which gives rise to mountain ranges, which gives the stability to the earth. So today the scientists say it is due to the mountain ranges that the earth is stable. The Quran says in Surah Naba, chapter number 78, verse number 6 and 7, we have made the earth as an expanse, wal jibala autada, and the mountains as stakes. The Arabic word autad means stakes, means tent pegs. When you put a tent peg into the ground, the major peg goes deep in the ground, you see only a small portion above the ground. So similarly, the mountain that you see, the portion above the ground is a very small percentage. The major percentage is deep underground. Like how you see an iceberg. The iceberg that you see on top of the water is very small, less than 10%. The major portion of the iceberg is below water. Similarly, the mountains on top of the earth is a very small portion. The major portion is deep within the ground. The Quran says, in Surah Naziyat, chapter number 79, verse number 32, and Surah Ghashiyah, chapter number 88, verse number 19, that we have placed mountains standing firm. And when you read the book The Earth, which is one of the most referred book in the universities in the subject of geology, one of its authors, his name is Dr. Frank Press, and he writes in this book The Earth, and he draws the mountain, and he shows that the mountain has got deep roots, and the roots are wedge shaped, deep roots, and the portion you see above is a very small percentage. The major portion is deep underground. And Dr. Frank Press, who was an authority in geology, was also the president of the academic science in USA, and was also the scientific advisor to the previous president of USA, Jimmy Carter. He says that the function of the mountain is to prevent the earth from shaking, which he told just 50 years back, 100 years back. And Quran mentioned 1400 years ago in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 31, as well as Surah Nahl, chapter number 16, verse number 5, and Surah Luqman, chapter number 31, verse number 10. Quran says, we have placed on the earth mountain standing firm, lest it would shake with you. So Quran describes the function of the mountain to prevent the earth from shaking, which we discovered recently. Who would have mentioned this in the Quran? In the field of oceanology, there's a verse in the Quran which is mentioned in the Quran in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 53, which says, we have let free two bodies of flowing water, one sweet and palatable, the other is salty and bitter. Though they meet, they do not mix. There is a barrier, there is a barzakh which is forbidden to be trespassed. The message is repeated in Surah Rahman, chapter number 55, verse number 19 and 20, which says, Marajal Bayreni al-Taqyan, Bainama Barzakhullah Yabgyan. It is he who has let free two bodies of water, flowing water. Though they meet, they do not mix. There is a barrier which is forbidden to be trespassed. Previously, the commentators of the Quran, they knew that there are two types of water, salty and sweet, but they could not understand what does the Quran mean by saying that these two waters meet, but they do not mix. There is a barrier, there is a barzakh between them. Today, after science advance, we have come to know that whenever one type of water flows into the other type of water, whenever sweet water flows into the salty water, it loses its constituents and gets homogenized into the water it flows. This area, homogenizing area, the Quran refers to as barzakh. Whenever one type of water flows into the other type of water, it loses its constituents and gets homogenized into the water it flows. This homogenizing area, the Quran refers to as barzakh. And this can be seen in several places in the world. If you go to Cape Town, that's the southern part of South Africa, you can see these two waters meeting. You can even see the color between these two waters different. In Egypt, when River Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea, and the best example is the Gulf of Mexico, which starts from the Gulf of Mexico. It flows for thousands of miles. From the Gulf of Mexico, it goes northwards towards the east coast of North America, then flows eastwards and goes towards the west coast of Europe. Though it flows for thousands of miles, both waters are distinct. And if you travel in a boat in the Gulf Stream and pick up water from the left side and pick up water from the right side, one is sweet and the other is salty. Even the temperature between the two, it differs. Further, when you read in the subject of oceanology, there was a verse in the Quran, Surah Nur, chapter number 24, verse number 40, which was shown to Professor Dr. Durga Rao, who is a marine engineer and expert in the field of oceanology. He was teaching in the King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah. Surah Nur, chapter number 24, verse number 40 says, as to the state of the unbeliever, it is like the depths of darkness. It's like the depths of darkness in a vast, deep ocean. Waves topped with dark clouds. If a man stretches out his hand, he cannot see. For to whom Allah sends no light, he does not see. What does this verse of the Quran mean by saying the state of an unbeliever's mind is like the depths of darkness in a vast deep sea, vast deep ocean. Waves topped with dark clouds. Darkness above darkness. If a man stretches out his hand, he cannot see. For to whom Allah gives no light, he will not see. When Professor Durga Rao was shown this verse, he said that this verse is not referring to a normal sea. It's referring to a vast deep ocean. And previously we did not know that the depth of the ocean was dark, because a human being cannot go more than 20 to 30 meters unaided. It is in 1900 when we discovered submarines, we came to know that the deep part of the ocean, it is dark. Even the fishes which swim in the deep part of the ocean, they have their own light. And Professor Durga Rao said that this darkness is due to two phenomena. Number one, when the light enters the ocean, the light is absorbed in layers. And today we know that the light has got 7 components, and we learned in school about Vipure: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange and red.